So, hello everyone. Today we are talking to people who identify themselves as friends of the dialectical mind. And in this series, we have with us Nandini Bharadwaj. Nandini is an RCI registered clinical psychologist. And without me wasting much of your time, Nandini, please tell us a bit about yourself. And we're so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Richa. It's always nice to connect with you. And hi, happy Friendship Day.
Happy Friendship Day.
Yeah, and to everyone watching. I'm just really thrilled to be here talking about my favorite topic and Richa's favorite topic, just dialogues around mental health. And I am, yes, a clinical psychologist, and I founded my um, enterprise, Wellness, in 2019 with the aim to make mental health accessible, diagnosis accessible, evidence based treatments accessible. And just keeping that in mind, right out of my MPhil, I decided to go forward with that. And we're a registered MSME based out of Punjab. Yeah, now. And it's exciting. And this magic happens right from a computer screen, which makes it that much more affordable, that much more accessible, and even confidential. So I believe that this whole pre-COVID times, there was this worry around therapy and confidentiality and accessibility. But I feel like now, with the political, economic climate that we have now, it's just that much more okay to say, hey, I need help and I need to make sense of what I'm going through, and I'm going to do it from across my room, my office, my kitchen. And I'm seeing that happen. And it's really empowering to see clients come up and admit, hey, this is what I'm going through and I need you to make sense for me. Yeah.
So I really like your use of the word magical here, because it, to me also, it indeed seems magical, because transformation, being able to bring that change in your life, has become so much more accessible, and people are talking about it in everyday spaces. So there's space for more dialogue. So it does seem indeed magical, and thanks for pointing it out. So Nandini, I'd like to ask you, how did you embark on this journey? Like, what nudged you to become a full-fledged mental health professional? What was
Right.
yeah.
Right. I don't talk about myself a lot, and especially publicly, but I feel like back when I was an adolescent, perhaps in the seventh standard, we used to have these scholastic fairs in schools, and they had these books called Chicken Soup for the Teenager Soul, Chicken Soup for whatever soul, right?
Yeah.
And so I would read the word counselor quite a lot on those books, because there were stories about how teens were trying to be more resilient, trying to deal with so much, with death, with bullying, with everything. And there were these magical little offices in schools where the students were being sent, and then they would feel better, and that's how the story ended. And I was wondering, why does my school not have that? Or why does, yeah, I mean, why do I not, I've never seen a counselor. So what does that mean? And who are these people who make sense of, I don't know, everything for others? So it was really interesting to me. And then, of course, my grandpa, my father, there was a whole background of psychology. So there was a climate to discuss Freud and Jung and everyone. So it was interesting. My understanding of psychology started just from there. And I knew that I wanted to be a therapist and engage in stories and healing.
That's really fascinating that your journey started so early, and also that you took it all the way where now you are a licensed, recognized practicing therapist. Um, so that said, I mean, with all the magic and all the positive development that we're seeing that's happening in the space, but I'm sure there are some challenges that also exist. So, as a therapist, what do you think are the challenges for you as a professional? And then on the other side of the table, for people who are trying to access mental health services. So, from both perspectives, you just point that out.
Right, right. I felt like in the pre-COVID era, there were very different challenges, and now it's slightly different. I think better, if I can say that. In terms of the clients, I felt that confidentiality was such a big issue. I remember back in RML, we had clients who had to take buses and trains and come from all these different places. And so it's also just expensive to come for referrals, to come for frequent sessions. So then we had to coordinate with psychiatrists and see when the patient can come in for their medical checkup. Also take a session through that.
And the entire day would go like that only for the patient. It's 9 to 5 in the hospital only, that entire day.
Exactly. And for patients who do not have that sort of financial backing, it becomes that much more difficult because they're giving up on their daily wages to come take treatment or get their wives and children for treatment. And it's just really, really difficult to see all of that. And so I felt that through the whole shift in how teleconsultations became a thing, I was later associated with AIIMS, and I noticed that now patients had access to talking to their doctors and therapists through a screen, and that's so magical. And we quickly adapted, the medical community, the mental health community. So I was really thankful that technology made all of that possible. And I think that that was one thing that I feel like was a struggle and is now slightly shifting. Yeah. And I feel this will only get better. The more we understand technology, the more features that are incorporated. I mean, Zoom became a thing.
Right. Who would have thought? Yeah. I mean, who would have even known about Zoom? I didn't know about Zoom before.
Same. Yeah. So that, but in terms of the struggles of, let's say, a therapist, I feel like it's obviously a great profession to be in if you're someone who has the appetite for conversations, someone who would want to talk about psychological impact, social impact, everything. So it's a nice profession in that regard. It's very meaningful, the work that you do. I also feel like it was a personal calling, but the struggles are, you obviously are always, I'd say, taking in a lot of information. And so I'm reading on how secondary trauma becomes a thing. How you're vicariously taking in all that information, all those emotions. And I'd often notice that after a difficult session, my body would sort of tense up sometimes. And then I'd have to, take a few minutes and then move into another session. So I feel like as therapists, perhaps our investment is not in terms of building a clinic straight away or getting staff, but our investment is our own bodies.
Right. So you're putting your heart and soul into it.
Yes. Yeah. And the impact is also, it impacts your bodies, it impacts your minds, but I was surprised. I mean, I knew it would impact your mind a little bit here and there, but we trained to deal with that. But the impact on the body, just the duality of the whole mind and body.
I think that goes out of the window then.
Yeah.
pretty much
So,
evidence against that theory of duality.
yes, yes, exactly. So I would notice that I'd go talk to my parents or have dinner, and I'd be kind of done after some sessions. I'd be like, I don't want to talk right now. I don't want to listen. My senses felt overwhelmed, at least in the beginning.
Right.
So that's then how I knew, okay, these many sessions, these types of sessions, these types of clients, what is my forte, what am I personally comfortable doing. So all of that, I think, really helped me navigate the struggles and the difficulties that come with the profession. So I think that is what was interesting to me, apart from all the other things that you keep hearing and saying. But this I felt was more interesting because I personally had no idea that it would impact your body in a way like,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And we often neglect that, there's this
Yeah.
interesting book that I read called Body Keeps the Score. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I can totally understand what you're saying, it does have a very physical manifestation. So stemming from this that you've highlighted, I just wanted to ask if there are actually any support mechanisms available for therapists currently in our country. Somewhere, a safe space where the therapist can go after a long day or a particularly difficult case.
Right, right. I do know of a lot of colleges and institutions that offer supervision in terms of having circles of therapists who want to talk about how their day went, how they're dealing with clients, and they also get supervision depending on how many years of experience one therapist has over the other, and just a bunch of conversations on how to deal with a particular illness, a particular a story, and how to help the therapist feel more equipped in doing that, but also how they're taking it, how that secondary trauma is getting processed.
Right.
So I think, and I'm not sure, but I think TIS and NIM Hands do offer these services, or at least people out of these institutes provide these services. I also myself am a firm believer in understanding that therapy is also something that therapists should think of. Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like you will only be a healthy therapist when you also have a space wherein you know how to be a client.
Right. Yeah, and I think that also grounds you, because it makes you aware of your own limitations. Otherwise, you automatically assume a hierarchical position where it's always like I know better, right? So, and that is something which, as therapists, have to be sort of really careful about.
Absolutely. Yeah. The power dynamics can go in any relationship, and we should, as social beings, be aware of, okay, who am I? What am I representing? What is my client going to feel? How is it going to impact the way I am conducting myself, my language, the terms I use?
Right.
Conversations around intersectionality, neurodivergence.
Right. And even labels or diagnosis, for that matter, like how careful I am with the diagnosis of it.
Yes. So I see that in my personal practice, that I ask my clients if they would rather go through a diagnostic label, the whole testing, assessment bit, or are they comfortable just exploring how they're feeling without having to put it under a syndrome or a disorder. And
wow, I mean, that's brilliant that you're doing
that. And clients want the latter. They do not want a label. They just want to make sense of how things are. And I feel that also allows for transdiagnosis, that also allows for treatments to be accessed not only from a symptom, but also how you're seeing it from different contexts.
It makes the treatment more humane and also customized, I think.
Yes, exactly.
it's brilliant that you're doing this, Nandini, because I've seen in a lot of cases that people are reduced to the diagnosis that they are given, and then anything, and even if people have physical issues, it is brushed under the carpet as a part of their diagnosis. So if someone is on antipsychotic medication and they have put on weight and they're complaining about it, so that complaining will be viewed as a part of symptom because they have that diagnosis of being someone who's using antipsychotics. So that's where, it becomes problematic.
Absolutely. And, I have seen clients complain about how if they have gained weight and they're wanting to talk about feeling low, the doctors or perhaps other people, I'm sure, are talking about how it's because of the weight gain.
Right.
And
because of the illness,
Yes.
So So I'm very happy that you've adopted that approach, and it's refreshing, honestly, to hear someone with a clinical bent of work to actually acknowledge and talk about this.
I feel like clinical psychology as a branch, though benefits a lot from psychiatry and the nomenclatures and the DSM and the ICD, and it is fantastic from the perspective of, okay, these are the disorders, this is what's impacting social functioning, this is what happens, this is this and that. Okay, great. It is helpful, and I think our academic training requires that, but I also know when to say, hey, this is where the books stop and this is where we extend ourselves as humans.
Right. That's brilliant. It's brilliant that you put it like that. So, and I agree with you where I feel all of these obviously have significance in patient's life as well, patient or client or the person we are dealing with. But also these are more for understanding of the mental health professional while they are training. So we cannot just confine ourselves to those books and just be theoretical about it. We have to stretch beyond the books. Which brings me to my next question. Obviously, we have time limitations and all. What do you feel about the mental health scenario in India? I mean, what kind of challenges do we encounter, and what is the way ahead as a professional? What do you think is the way ahead? If there's one thing you had to emphasize upon, what would that be?
I feel like mostly there is this understanding that, hey, I am at the brink of feeling absolutely terrible, and hence I must talk once to someone. And that also happens after years and years of struggling with your inner self. And then once you go there, you're looking for a one-stop fix.
Just with the one conversation, it's almost as if people don't want to come back for a second conversation. It's like a formality. I've been to the therapist once, and that's
it. It's a tick in the box event.
Yes. And that's problematic.
And I also see and notice, how I wouldn't say anything in particular about just the clients, but the conversation around it, the belief that, hey, therapy is talking. It's talk therapy. Or as they say in Hindi, बातें ही तो हो रही हैं.
Right.
बात ही तो की उन्होंने.
और उसके पैसे क्यों ले रहे हैं? या हमारा क्यों समय बर्बाद कर रहे हैं उसके लिए?
Right.
I agree with you.
Right. And then it's that sense of emergency that, hey, I want to vent for 45 minutes, and then I also want to be completely fixed in some sense. And so I feel like it's not the client's fault, but it's the way we like to operationalize mental health as just a goal, or as a trait, or as the lack of any symptoms, and just the way it's seen, that oh, mera self-esteem theek kar do.
I mean, as if we can compartmentalize people.
Yeah. Yeah. And to do that in very
40 minutes.
That, and also in a very tangible way, wherein they feel like, okay, it's a score that one
Yeah.
day I will come to a therapist and it will suddenly not be there.
Right.
And so I feel like that needs to change. They need to understand that mental health is a journey, it's a process, it's something that happens, yes, through dialogues, yes, through skill training, yes, through doing homework, yes, through consistency. But all in all, their progress is, I like to tell this to my clients, and I'll say this to you as well. I don't have a diagram, but I saw this very interesting way in which progress should be measured.
Right.
So they say progress in therapy is not linear, it's circular.
Right.
So
Right.
what happens is that if you're, let's say, here, and what will happen is through therapy, you'll go like this. And then the next time you'll go like this.
Right.
And you'll go like this. So
Right.
you'll keep coming back to that. Yeah.
Anchor.
But yeah.
Sort of. Yeah.
Yeah. So even the stress and the problems that you may have, you will come back to them, but the gap and the frequency, I mean, the gap will increase and the frequency of the problems will decrease. So it's not an absence of, let's say, anxiety.
Right.
Which
less
is why,
intense anxiety and less frequent. Yeah. Less dysfunction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Which is why we don't call them diseases, we call them disorders, because it's more to do with functionality and impact. And it's not something, you will always have some form of stress or anxiety. You will develop better resilience, growth, coping mechanisms. And that's what therapy is about. So I guess in my long and twisted way, what I wanted to say was
no, it was a perfect metaphor, actually.
Glad. But yeah, I mean, I feel like just the way that therapy is viewed, and I can only say that because that's what I do. That's, I think, one thing that really needs to change. The fact that when you're taking services or that you're in the process of mental health, you can't make it just one tick in the box kind of a thing.
Yeah.
It needs to be seen as a regular health checkup.
Right.
To go to someone when you're feeling a certain way. Sometimes you want to share a quick opinion, you need a quick guidance. Just see it like that instead of, hey, I am absolutely feeling terrible. I'm here for one session. I will do everything within this one session. And then I will come back again after a couple months when I'm feeling bad again. I feel like that happens quite a lot. Not that I've seen that in my personal practice as such, because I feel like clients have been able to make sense of that through these metaphors and the introduction that I give to therapy in the first session itself. But I feel like that is still the basic understanding around therapy, which I feel needs to change.
So there are two aspects of it. One is the perception, and second is definitely the therapist factors and how effectively the therapist is able to communicate that this is a process and it's a one-off, not a one-off thing, and people will have to keep coming back. Like how I personally like to see it and explain it to people when they ask me whether they should go for therapy or not. Like I view it as a skill, and when you're learning a new skill, you practice, and practice makes perfect. So that's what I tell people, that you have to keep coming back to the process. You won't get a lot of skills overnight. Right. So this brings me to the last discussion point, Nandini. You're aware of the dialectical mind. You support its vision. As a mental health professional, why do you think something like this, an organization like this, is even relevant?
Right. So I feel like wellness and the dialectical mind are, in that sense, like sister branches. In the sense of, if I am talking to an individual and I'm working towards their healing, and they build resilience and they feel better, and they go back to a community that does not support that journey, that does not take into account that person and how the community supports the healing as well. I feel like the person will be lost again and will forever pin it on themselves and will keep feeling worse and worse and worse, even after treatments.
Right.
So I feel like that's where the dialectical mind comes in. It allows for a community that not only helps heal, but also supports.
Right. So sustaining that positive
yes,
that you've been able to make in the clinic. So sustaining
yes,
it back at home, back at work, back at schools, all of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of a social enterprise. You not only are talking about a healthier community, a stronger, tight knit community, you're also talking mental health advocacy, mental health literacy.
Yeah.
You're talking neurodivergence.
Yeah.
You're talking intersectional feminism.
Yeah.
And right? A
lot about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I feel like what the dialectical mind has done is also create resources that are so fascinating to me, not only from the perspective of a clinical psychologist, but let's say if I'm someone who is training to become a psychologist, mental health professional, or even as a lay person who wants to teach their children or their friends or have a conversation around mental health. You know, those Instagram posts wherein you talked about the ABCs of mental health.
Yeah.
And right. And your podcasts with Dr. Shrikant Bansal.
Yes.
Beautiful. I could not stop watching that. I was really happy, honestly, Richa, to hear his perspectives on how he sees grief and how, even bipolar. Yeah, absolutely. And just the type of questions that you also ask, it allows for a very smooth understanding of understanding towards destigmatizing, understanding towards just clarity, just normalizing of issues that somewhere or the other we all go through. Grief, anxiety, stress, low moods.
Yes.
So just that, I feel like the dialectical mind is doing that. It's allowing for a community that is strong, that is aware, and that is resilient. And these conversations cannot happen just once. You know, it's a place where you feel like you can go back to.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I feel like you're that bookstore, you're that library.
Wow.
It's that one place where you go in for a cup of coffee, where you go in for a read of a book, where you're going in for conversations, wherein it's that home, that warm October, December. I don't know that
feeling. That's perfect for book lovers and introverts. Yeah, that's the perfect home. Yes.
Yeah. So I feel like you're doing that, and not only through conversations, but also through the workshops, the resources, everything. So I'm really thankful that there is a community that allows for me and my clients to also go and just feel more comfortable in. So I'm really thankful for the dialectical mind for that.
Nandini, you put it so beautifully. And I am extremely thankful to you for taking out the time, and actually walking us through the entire nuances of therapy and how we should really approach it. So it has been incredible having you. It's been lovely speaking to you. And I hope to keep talking to you in the future, as the dialectical mind and wellness as sister branches and working together.
Absolutely. Forever a friend of the dialectical mind.
Absolutely.